Well, as I was presenting the show last night, I checked in on the new website set up by the Victorian government for residents to obtain permits to enter Victoria. And as you may have seen, I pointed out to Michael Kroger on the panel that 90 minutes after the launch of the application site, it still wasn't working. In fact, it was a full 3 hours before anyone could apply for a permit. 3 hours under the Premier's new colour-coded traffic light permit system. Well, today the government was talking up its plans for a world-class biosecurity bubble for players competing in next month's Australian Open tennis tournament. Now, given their track record, Victorians might need to hold their breath. Joining me now is the Liberal MP for Caulfield and opposition spokesman for community safety, David Southwick. Good evening to you, David.
Good evening, Chris.
What happened? Are you able to work out what actually happened, or was it just par for the course? They are logistical dunderheads.
Well, Chris, if this government can't run a website, then how do we expect them to run a state? At every single hurdle, they have failed. They continue to run government by press release without working out the details that follow. And you must not forget that this government made the announcement 4 hours earlier that people needed to get that permit, and they threatened those that didn't have a permit with a $5,000 fine, and it took 90 minutes before the website was up and running. I know my phone was running absolutely hot with people saying, what do they do? They were stranded. They didn't know what to be able to do in terms of that permit system following. And those that had a permit prior were also unclear whether that permit that they had was going to be useful, or they needed to get the new permit. So the government has been running things in a very confusing way. They've been running the state by fear, and it's no leadership, Chris. It is the last thing that people need. And the fact that we've got Victorians locked out, not being able to come back home, is a complete failure. People should be able to go back home to their families, not locked out. And that should be Daniel Andrews' first priority, is to get people home to their families, not lock them out of their own state.
It is an utter joke what has occurred here. You've nailed that. Now, initially, as I understand it, through the evening yesterday, they pointed the finger at the Chief Health Officer, but then the Chief Health Officer went public and said, no, I've signed off on this hours ago. You see, not only do they or can't they handle the logistics of a major project, which they've proved time and time again, they lie about who's responsible for it.
You're absolutely right, Chris. They had collective amnesia when it came to the hotel quarantine review. No one took responsibility. We had a Premier that said the buck stops with him. He has not taken any responsibility for that failure, killing 801 people. And we will not stop until we ultimately see Daniel Andrews take that responsibility. And again, it is a program without detail. We also found that when the hotel quarantine Mark II was announced, the government didn't have the details worked out to charge people. They had people arriving in Victoria and not the laws to charge them. And then, when we asked the government what they were going to do, they said, well, you know what, we'll work out the details later. We'll send them an invoice 2 or 3 months after their hotel quarantine and expect them to pay. This government doesn't do anything right. And ultimately, people are scared. People are living, not wanting to be able to leave their home. And this traffic light system that we've got, not knowing whether things are going to change from green to red, not within a day's notice, within hours' notice. How can people are expected to be able to go about their lives, be able to travel and see loved ones interstate, when they've got a system that's locking them down, that's ensuring that they are kept under the thumb and the rule of this government? And it really is a big brother and a complete overreach that we've got a system that everyone is permitted, all their whereabouts is known, all where they travel, what they do is certainly in the hands of the government and their information. And I think it's not the way that Victorians expect to be treated. Victorians are treated like second-class citizens at the moment by the Andrews Labor government, and something needs to give.
And this is a prime example of being under the thumb. You mentioned those words just then, and it's almost like having a visa system in Europe in World War II, where we set up checkpoints and we make sure that the enemy doesn't come in.
Yeah, look, I heard just before in your earlier interview about having a national cabinet, really, and that's why a national cabinet was set up with the state ministers to come together with the federal government to try and work this stuff out, because we've seen the Labor ministers completely overreact on this stuff, the Labor premiers overreact on this stuff.
Yep.
And when you have a situation with one COVID case locking down a state, we've gone absolutely not from suppression but complete elimination. And we have a very low bar, Chris, a very low bar that means that we're going to be jumping at shadows. We're not going to be able to know whether we're coming or we're going. And how can you run a state? How can you run a business? How can you go to work and expect to be able to, have a job? All of these things are up in the air when there is no confidence in a system. The government has given Victorians no confidence going forward in what they've been able to do, and they've had 8 months to work this out.
Yeah.
8 months to work this out. They locked us down on January 1. We've still got people stranded wanting to come home with their loved ones in their state and in their home in Victoria.
They have been terribly risk averse, but still prepared to trash the economy. One last question.
Yep.
They spruik big time today how safe and biosecure the bubble was related to the Australian Open next month, and how all the planes will come in, everyone will be right. We're trying as hard as we possibly can. We've heard that before. I guess Victorians have to just hold their breath, do they?
I think you've nailed it, Chris. I mean, I'd love to see the Australian Open go ahead, and I certainly all for that. But I've got no confidence in the way this government runs anything at the moment. I think anything they do is a massive risk. They don't have the details worked out, and unfortunately, it's really a lucky dip as to what we're going to end up under Daniel Andrews and his government.
David Southwick, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Pleasure. Thank you, Chris.